Alexa Dunn here, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Once again, I'm going to talk about college admissions again. You might have caught my previous video, which was all kind of tips and tricks and wild speculation, to be honest, about what to do with COVID-19 with college admissions. And I mentioned in that video that I would love to talk more about writing essays. This is my bread and butter, and so here we are. We're going to talk about essays. And since I've left it a bit late in the season, so to speak, a few of you may have already submitted your early decision applications, but everyone for RD, there is still plenty of time. Do not stress out too much. And worst case, if you've written something, I can help you with revision. But because I took my sweet time, I'm gonna push together a ton of kind of subtopics of writing essays, and this will be a slightly longer video just to cover a lot of ground. But as always, I'm going to have timestamps down below, including to the end of the video, when I am going to do an analysis of some real student essays. You can find them posted online. I have some favorite resources, which will also be linked to down below so that you can check it out yourself and or follow along. I'm going to switch to kind of on screen and show you these essays and just give a little bit of commentary. But first at the top, I do want to offer a little bit of reassurance that if you're finding your college essays really difficult, stressful, etc., that is completely normal. Even seasoned writers have trouble with personal essays because personal essays, personal memoir, creative nonfiction, doesn't come naturally to most people, even creative writers, and it's difficult to kind of talk about yourself, because you have to talk about yourself, but strike a balance between saying interesting things about yourself, but in an interesting, compelling way that's good to read without bragging. Though most often than not, bragging is definitely a pitfall that these essays can of course fall into, but more often than not, the biggest pitfall that I see is simply admissions essays that are boring, basic, a little bit plotting. I'm going to talk more about it. Essentially, your essay shouldn't be a basic blow-by-blow of things you like or things you have done. There is a bit of artistry to them, which is why they are difficult to do. But that's why I am here to help you with all the kind of nuts and bolts of your essay, what your essay really is, what it should do, and some practical tips on how to take your essay to the next level. So starting with essay basics, and I am talking about the Common App essay. Beyond the Common App essay, you're also going to have to write a ton of supplements, as you might well know, for many schools. Or if you're in a state like California with the UC prompts, they no longer do a 650-word essay. They make you do shorter prompts. Not a fan, personally, but that is for another discussion. But you have to write a 650-word essay if you're applying to any schools that use the Common App. This is your one big essay. Your essay should be you on a page. And yes, I know that sounds super stressful, and it doesn't have to be all of you on a page, but I will say the best personal essays are the ones that do more than one thing. They take a topic, a framing topic, as a way to kind of look at different aspects of you as a person, different parts of your life, different interests, etc. But we'll talk about brainstorming more later, as well as frame devices. But you want your essay to capture something about you that isn't necessarily obvious from other parts of your application. Your application is always going to be considered in both part but also whole. Think about the experience of the admissions officer reading it. They know your name. You're Katie from Iowa. Oh, Katie from Iowa loves painting and softball and, oh, look, recommendations from Katie's English teacher, probably really strong in the humanities. Oh, I see they're applying for sociology. There's a picture and there's a story that's forming about Katie from Iowa. And then Katie from Iowa's personal essay should do something special. You want to either kind of punch them in the face, so to speak, with something really interesting or moving, something that maybe isn't completely obvious from the rest of the application. That doesn't mean you can't write about things that do come up on your application, such as specific activities you've been in, but I say more often than not, if you can find something to write about that you don't have any other way of putting on your application, the more, the better. Depending on the activity though, if you have a really interesting, unique activity that's naturally going to be listed elsewhere on your application, it would behoove you to go into that, because anything that makes the officers go, huh, you might want to expand on that and tell them a good story. So in Katie's case, maybe the thing that goes into her personal essay that you're otherwise just not gonna get from her application. She's a pretty straightforward applicant. But maybe Katie is one of the most popular modders of The Sims. Can you tell I'm excited about the new expansion pack? But maybe that's Katie's hobby. And she's created all of these mods and they've been downloaded tens of thousands of times. Maybe she's even been highlighted by EA. That could make a really interesting personal essay. It's something very specific and strange and weird that Katie is into. Now, of course, there might be other things that Katie could write about, but that's just an example where if someone like me, in the past I've done private consulting, and now I do pro bono consulting for a nonprofit, when I talk to a student and I'm just asking them about their hobbies and their interests, I'll look at their resume, I'll ask them about their career aspirations, their family, and they say something that just kind of sticks in my ear. I'm like, wait, what was that? It's the thing that makes you stop and go, huh. You want the thing that is going to enable admissions to give you a cute nickname. Katie becomes that Sims girl from Iowa. Maybe you're the K-pop stan from California, or you're the kid whose hobby is plumbing from New York City. I don't know. Whatever that kind of special sauce is for you, it's always great if they can give you a nickname because your essay was interesting and memorable. Sometimes you might also be the one that made me cry, but I'm gonna let you off the hook. It's really hard to write a really good moving essay that makes someone cry, so don't set that as your bar standard. Now here's another aspect of your Common App essay that should be obvious and yet you'd be amazed with the essays that I've looked at over the years. It should reflect positively on you. And you're like, duh, you would be amazed. Be very, very careful picking any kind of topic that could skew negative, where you could get into a rant, where you could come across as bitter. And actually, this is why I really hate the Common App prompt about failure. That prompt is a lie. They don't actually want you to write about failure, write about something bad, write about something negative. They want you to write about success, positivity, how you turned something into something good. But so often I'll see students write that and they're just kind of complaining for 650 words about something bad that was done to them. It's kind of like a victim mentality sort of thing. Other places I've seen this, don't write about an ex and like breakups and like that kind of stuff. I've legit seen students write essays about them cheating on their boyfriend or girlfriend, and it's like, don't. No, that's not a good college admissions essay. Another weird one that can be a real double-edged sword, and people are always like, really? Weight loss? Anything that can kind of go into disordered eating territory, you don't know what admissions officer is reading your essay, and it can actually reflect poorly on you if you demonstrate obsessive compulsive or disordered eating habits in your essay. This kind of brings me to the sticky territory. I guess we're talking about things maybe you shouldn't write about, essentially. And both, you should be positive in your essay, but there's also double-edged positivity. Double-edged positivity, a good example would be anytime a relatively privileged individual writes an essay about a trip to a poor country or poor location, third world, to do charity work, you have to be very, 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 very careful. This kind of essay is actually a cliche that admissions professionals joke about all the time. It's like the rich kid essay about helping the poors in another country. That said, I have also seen multiple students execute this essay successfully. I've worked with them personally. It's all about execution and how you write it. You don't want to come across as like boastful or kind of blind to your own privilege. You do want to come across as a thoughtful person who's interested in the world. Be careful with that one, however. And the thing about eating disorders brings up mental health. Be very, very careful how you approach mental health on your college application. This can form a really crucial part of who we are. And some students, again, I've worked with some students who have beautifully written about mental health struggles. They've incorporated it into their college application because it was true to who they were and it was important to who they were. But if you watch my COVID-19 video, I mentioned that anytime you write about trauma, it can be very difficult to write well about trauma, especially when you're still in the trauma or close to the trauma. It's a natural thing not to have perfect emotional distance from something that has happened recently or that you're still going through. And that's where it can get tricky to write about mental health or abuse. I've also worked with students on essays that addressed abuse. You can do it. Again, honestly, if you're approaching these topics, find a trusted, experienced adult to help you with that essay. That's often what's going to help you just get that second opinion to find the lens to write about a tougher topic. But you just want to be careful about making that the focus of your personal essay. It could be something that you address in another supplement, or there's actually a great area on the application called additional information. This is a great place to put fact-based information that's very important for admissions to know about you. Or you can also, I definitely recommend this, talk to your guidance counselor. They're going to be writing a recommendation for you. Really great for them to mention those sorts of things. So for example, if you really struggled in high school because of mental health difficulties or something awful going on in your life, you might not necessarily want to write an entire essay on that. I mean, mining your trauma is not always fun, but your guidance counselor is there to give the school context. You know, Katie went through a rough time sophomore year. Maybe they give some context. How much is a school entitled to your private medical information is another question, but they give the context of they went through a rough time and I worked with them, and that's why you might see a dip in grades here, but you know, they have the support services they need, and look at that rise in grade trend or what have you. You're not alone in applying to college. There's always other people, your guidance counselor especially, who can help provide that context on your application so you don't necessarily have to go into that topic in your personal essay. Another one shocking that I have to say is writing about illegal or unethical activity in your college essay. I guess this kind of goes to that cheating thing. Don't write about cheating, period, of any kind. Even if you learned your lesson, it's rarely a good look to basically be like, I did something really, really terrible. Let me talk about it for 650 words. Again, you could factually discuss something like that in the additional information section. For example, if you have been suspended or even expelled from an institution, you're going to have to cover that somewhere on your application, but I don't recommend that you do your entire personal essay on it, with some rare exceptions. But at that point, I would hope that student would be working with a qualified professional to help them very delicately approach that topic. But again, I've seen essays like this about students who wrote about breaking into places and being caught and being suspended from school, and it just rarely reflects well on you. I did mention don't write about exes. You really shouldn't write about relationships at all, romantic relationships. 9 times out of 10, they're just gonna come across as really kind of sappy and very juvenile, and they rarely say anything about you because you're literally writing about another person, a person that admissions doesn't know. So just 9 times out of 10, don't do that. Just speaking of cliches, because I mentioned that volunteerism thing, sports essays are very, very cliched. It doesn't mean you can't write them, but you have to be aware that they are very cliched. So you have to be thoughtful about how you write them. Don't write a basic, it was rough and hard, but I overcame and won the big game. Like, you have to be very, very thoughtful about how you write about sports. Don't write a sports essay just because you think it's what admissions wants to see in terms of you succeeding in the face of challenge or what have you. Similarly, though, maybe this is a bit less en vogue than it used to be. This is advice I've given for years, not to write about Harry Potter. Though now, but for a long time, that's just been a big cliche. The students who write about how Harry Potter inspired them and changed their life. I mean, ditto, same, but admissions has seen a lot of those essays. And so 9 times out of 10, generally, honestly, I would avoid an essay about books and reading and writing. Not always, but I am a reader. I am a writer. But even I have trouble reading them sometimes, and just generally I don't advise students do that, because if you get an admissions officer who doesn't like the thing that you're writing about, or has read 8 million I'm a reader essays from English majors, or 8 million I'm a writer essays from English majors, and or doesn't have warm fuzzy feelings about Harry Potter, or just read 100 essays on that already, you're gonna rub them the wrong way, and you're definitely not gonna stand out. Be very, very careful with I'm a reader-writer essays as a reader and a writer. Though honestly, I'm giving you these kind of hot, fast tips, but I kind of mention all of these can have exceptions. There's always going to be the exception to the rule, but regardless, it's very useful to know what admissions see a lot of. So how do you come up with an essay then? Like, I probably just scuttled half of your ideas, possibly things you've already written. So brainstorming. First of all, the secret of the Common App. Although I guess it's less of a secret. I mean, they literally have a prompt that's, if there's something else you want to write about, submit that essay. You can literally write anything you want for the Common App. You do not have to follow any of the prompts because they give you a cheat prompt. Now, the other prompts are there to help because some people write very well to prompts, but some people don't write very well to prompts. And forgive yourself if you don't have a million brilliant ideas when you look at the Common App prompts. But that said, it's equally daunting to be like, you can write about anything, and you're like, don't tell me that. That's horrifying. So the first piece of advice is dual-pronged. It's either going to work for you or it's not. It's either going to help you to read other essays or it's not going to help you at all. It's going to crowd your brain and kind of make you flip out. But if you think you can read sample admissions essays, honestly, reading a few of them can start to turn the wheels in your brain. You start to see the form, you start to see how people approach topics that got them into college, and it might give you ideas for your own essay. So as I mentioned, I'm going to link down below to some of my favorite resources for where you can read real admissions essays, and I'm going to go over a few of them at the end of this video. But that also might not help you at all. So for starting, I always suggest that students just throw spaghetti at a wall, open a blank document, and jot down anything you can think of. Look at your resume and think about stories and things you can write about. So any of the clubs you're in, do you have an interesting story for any of them? Was there some activity or trip or project, anything that could have a story? Just write a line like, maybe it's that time my Girl Scout troop got lost in the woods. I don't know. Maybe it's the time you were assigned a topic in debate and they made you take a side that completely conflicted with what you believe in. Just ideas. Maybe it's the kind of activity that's on your resume and if someone saw it, they'd be like, what is that? A great example of this, a real one of a student I worked with, they had on their resume that they did lion dancing. I know what lion dancing is, but I know a lot of people don't. And I said to her, that's an unusual activity for a teenage girl. Tell me more about that. She ended up writing her entire essay about this. It was something that was really specific to her family, her culture, and she'd actually had a really interesting emotional journey when it came to this connection to her culture, and that's what she ended up writing about. You'd be amazed what you can get an essay out of, essentially. Next, answer some of these questions. Kind of questioning yourself is a great way to brainstorm, so some really good ones. How do you spend most of your free time? Really think about things you actually enjoy doing, by the way. You're always going to have a better essay if you actually enjoy the thing that you were writing about, and it says something personal and specific about you. The next question is, what do you like/love to do? What are your career aspirations? Nothing wrong with writing an essay about, let's say you want to be a vet. Well, why do you want to be a vet? That's a really good thing to write about if you were applying to schools as kind of a pre-vet major. Though most schools don't have that major, but just to give you an idea, your career aspirations, I want to be a vet, write about it. Who is your favorite person/who do you spend a lot of time with? This can be the basis of a really good kind of family community type essay. Actually, some of the examples I'm going to go over are from the New York Times. Every year they feature successful essays about money. Very often those essays are actually also about kind of family and like where you're from and what your life is like. Think about rituals that you have in your family, traditions, things that are important to you. And it doesn't have to be sunny and wonderful. I mentioned that other student. She had conflicting feelings about performing in the Lunar New Year parade, and it changed as she got older. And that formed an emotionally compelling and interesting story. Think about an activity, event, or person who has formed who you are. For some students, that's a grandparent. It could be an activity like chess or first robotics. What is something about you that most people would be surprised to know? Like, are you a really popular modder for The Sims? Like, what are those kind of things? Like, when you play that game, Two Truths and a Lie, what are the truths that you throw into that game because you know they're gonna throw people for a loop because they would never believe them? Those are great things to write essays about. To give you an example from my life, I wrote my college essay on being a high school foreign exchange student to Germany because it literally changed my life and was something that I had just done. I wrote my essays after I'd returned, but it was a game changer for me. And I wrote about a really interesting, but also not all fun and games kind of experience that I had, something that really forced me to grow as a person. Next is kind of similar. It's, do you have a quirk or a hobby that is deeply personal/really specific? That modding The Sims can be a good example. But I worked with a student once. His hobby was growing oysters. It was so interesting, something that, especially to me as like a city person, I was like, excuse me? And it made for a really interesting essay because it's specific, personal, and something that they were passionate in, but it's also a little quirky. It's not a quote-unquote normal hobby. Oh, like I said, remember that nickname thing. You want to be the kid where they're like, that's the beekeeper, or what have you. And why do you raise bees? What are some of the things that go into beekeeping? Similarly, any unique programs or things that you've done. So that would fit with my high school foreign exchange student example. This could be specific summer programs you did or trips that you've taken, experiences that you've had with your family. So next we get a little bit abstract. My next question is, what are your 3 favorite character traits that you would want admissions to know about you? So the things about yourself that you are proud of, that you think make you both a good and an interesting person. Maybe you're funny. Maybe you are really empathetic. Maybe you're open-minded. Maybe you respond really well to change and you're a risk taker. Maybe you're analytical. These are all just kind of examples. Think about like kind of who you are, what makes you tick, and honestly, it's okay to struggle with this. You can ask another person. It's actually really helpful to ask adults. Your family sometimes, of course, is gonna especially your parents will have a sunny view of you, which isn't a bad thing. But this is what I do as a counselor. I get to know a student a little bit, and then I listen to how they talk about the things that interest them. And I'm the one who's like, I love how you analyze problems, or man, you're really empathetic. And then those are the things that we try to get across in an essay. Now, you're not gonna literally write about I'm a funny person or I'm a thoughtful person. You pick a topic that demonstrates these character traits that you hope to get across to them that would make you a good fit for their school. Next, similarly abstract, but what feeling do you want admissions to have when they read your essay? Think about that. Do you want them to laugh? Do you want them to be entertained? Do you want them to learn something fascinating about something that they maybe didn't know about before, like beekeeping or oyster farming or modding The Sims? What kind of world can you bring them into that is brand new? Or maybe you do want to hit them right in the feels. Those essays are harder to write, but you can 100% do it, especially if you're not a funny person. Don't try to be funny. It's great to have humor and voice in an essay. It's not great when it's forced and fake. If you are a more straightforward kind of feelings-driven person, maybe you are going to write that essay that hits them right in the feels. What do you want them to feel, and is it organic to what you write? And look over your brainstorm list and see what kind of topics might fit what you want to evoke in your essay. And in fact, my last tip is actually, after you've asked yourself all these questions, ask an outsider what they find interesting about you, what they think maybe you could write about. You could give a stranger or semi-stranger, like me, not literally me, your resume. You'd be amazed what a third party can pick out of your list of activities, basically. I've definitely helped students brainstorm essay ideas because I was like, wait, what's that? And then something that you think is very ordinary because it's part of your life and you're used to it, all of a sudden becomes something that you write about because a third party is like, no, that's actually really, really interesting. Tell me about beekeeping. Similarly, family can actually be helpful with this because they're going to remember stories and things that maybe you don't remember. They might jig your memory remember that trip we took and you got lost in a castle or what have you? And it can lead you to interesting stories and things to talk about. Because it's all about storytelling. So now we're going to talk about actually writing your essay. This is the daunting, frustrating part. I mentioned that pitfall before, and it's just very, very true. The biggest mistake that I see students write when it comes to actually writing their essay is that they're very play-by-play. They default to telling. A lot of repetitive I statements like, I did this, I saw that, I'm excited by, I really love this thing. It's fine to say that around the context of other things, but if all you do is give a lot of telling statements, you're telling admissions something, but you're not actually showing them anything, you're not really communicating anything interesting. I've even seen good writers do this as well because the personal memoir is such a daunting thing and it doesn't come naturally to people. Essentially, the number one thing I see is admissions essays that are boring. They can also be confusing. That's also a big problem. But boring is the number one crime that you can commit with an essay. It's just a bunch of play-by-play that sure tells me things, but doesn't really tell me anything. So this is when we get into storytelling technique in your essays and you're like, First of all, I give you full permission. So in your first draft, don't even think of it as a first draft. I always advise my students to do free writing. That is brain vomit. Whatever the topic is, and you can actually and should do this for multiple potential topics. Just write what comes to you about some of the different ideas that you have as much as you can or want to write. This is really how you find the topics that flow more naturally, that you have more to say about. Hopefully the ones you have stories about. Though I've definitely seen students do free writes that are story-free, and then it's my job to go, I can tell there's a story in this very straightforward line of fact. Tell me that story. Ideally, you beat someone like me to the punch, especially because you might not have someone like me to help you. Look for the stories within your own telling. Ask yourself questions. Sure, you can say, I really love working with horses. Vet example. Why? Explain to me why. Oh, well, I went to a summer camp when I was 12. Okay, what happened there? Oh, well, I had this counselor who, noticed that I was really homesick, and she introduced me to a horse named Bramble. Oh, this is what turns it into a story. Telling admissions, I love horses is great, but then you want to follow it up with details and story. Talk about Bramble and the counselor Susie, and it ties in homesickness, and that's your opportunity to talk about your family. You were homesick for your mom and your grandma who lives with you, and you're putting in little details. This is a layered essay that's going to tell admissions a bit about you. Oh, this student lives with their mom and their grandma. They're an only child and they're very close to their family, and some of the activities they normally do are playing board games and going to the movies, and they went to the summer camp and they fell in love with horses and now they want to be a vet. That is far more interesting than I really love animals, I've always loved animals, and I especially love horses, so I want to work with horses. Because the thing is, think about how many students could write an essay and say, I really love animals. Okay, great, but tell me a story. Be specific. Using another example of things I told you shouldn't write about, I read a really great essay about reading from a student many, many years ago. Yes, it was about books, but she was able to talk about where she was reading and why, and work in lots of relevant details about her family structure, kind of her role in her family, aspects of her background, and her culture. It was a really good essay. Yes, it was about reading, but it wasn't really about reading. It was about her as a person, and both how her world shaped her habits and how books shaped her. You always want to think about lensing and context. So when you're in that free writing stage, think about stories. Jot a few lines. What is the story? Think about scene setting. So this is where we're going to get into actual technique. Write some short scenes from your stories. All of it doesn't have to go into your essay, and in fact, you should be writing a couple thousand words for your 650 word essay. If you write 650 words bang on the nose, I promise you that essay is going to be thin on the ground, and someone like me would probably come in and say, I'm just not getting enough from this essay. It's better to write a lot and trim than to write not enough and try to add to it. Though if you write not enough, someone like me will tell you to add to it. So write some sample scenes. Think visually. Think about the 5 senses. You don't have to be the world's greatest creative writer to write these scenes, by the way. Let's think about beekeeping. Bearing in mind, I know nothing about beekeeping, but it's an example that I've used here because I clearly find it interesting. I mean, I do, because it's an unusual hobby for a teenager, and that's why I could make a good college admissions essay. Set the scene. Describe the cold mist of the morning as you head out to your hives, whatever they're going to be called. Use specific details, don't get too technical, but you want to be specific to draw the world. You have that canister thingy with the stuff that you puff into the hives. See, I know nothing about beekeeping, but you're gonna explain it to me when you're setting the scene in your story. Talk about what you're wearing. You're literally conjuring a mental picture of you walking to the hives and doing the stuff with the bees. Maybe you're retrieving honey and you describe it and you scrape it into jars and you kind of walk them. Briefly, you're not writing 8,000 words about this. This moment in the life, this day in the life, this thing that you do that you enjoy. If you use the mods example, maybe this small setting the scene story is the day that you opened up your game and you saw your own creation highlighted in the origin store and how surreal it was to see your name. I don't know what it is. And you use this as an opening image story to pull them in, and then you go into some of the more kind of straightforward fact-based telling of the story, but you've set that scene. And in fact, frame devices. This is another favorite thing that I love. So that first scene is called an opening image, and a classic storytelling technique, you see this in books, is to have a mirror image at the end, called the closing image, that somehow mirrors either literally the first image, but a little different, or the themes of the opening image, but a little different, because you are showing an arc. So a great example of this might be, maybe your opening image is singing in front of your family at Christmas and they made a fake little stage and you had a karaoke machine and you warbled out a Taylor Swift song and everyone clapped. And maybe your closing image is you on stage at Carnegie Hall performing a solo. Not that you have to go that big, but you kind of get my idea. If your story is writing about your love of singing and maybe it's your stage at high school, like let's be more realistic. Maybe you're talking about the journey, like think about those mirror images. Ideally, you do something different in the two so that you're showing growth. Maybe in the first one, you got so intimidated and frightened that you started crying and you confidently perform your piece because, you're not 5 anymore, or what have you. To give you an example from my essay in the Dark Ages, I started my story with the image of us at the 4-H Center in Washington, D.C. This was our orientation before we flew to Germany, and they had us create this piece of paper. We all had to write down a hope or a dream or a lyric that we liked, that we were kind of whatever we were feeling in the moment before we embarked on this year-long journey away from home. And they ripped up the paper, it was like construction paper, and everyone got a slip of paper to take with them. And I kind of set this image of 60 students at the 4-H Center and this journey, and then I wrote my essay. And at the end, I came back to that piece of paper. And I actually mentioned I lost it almost immediately, and I have no idea what was on that piece of paper. But it doesn't matter, because I remember exactly what I wrote on my part of the paper. And okay, this is very cheesy, but I closed my essay on a lyric from Fiona Apple. I was 17 years old, and you have to forgive me, I was very, very cheesy, but someone let me into college. And the point is, I returned to the opening theme. My intentions were smart. I'm a little embarrassed, but that is another example. It was never as a promise, by the way, because it was the year 2000. So think about these opportunities for storytelling. Another really great technique device is to have little snippets of dialogue, little scenes that have dialogue in them. In fact, opening with dialogue can be a really fun way to start an essay. Like a funny line or someone shouting something at you, and then it brings you into a scene. And of course, these aren't going to be very, very long, but it could be like someone says something to you and you respond something back. And it's like, then you say where you are and then you kind of go into the topic. Like maybe it's, grandma, those buns smell amazing. And you're talking about being in the kitchen with your grandma, and maybe it's an essay about your grandma. These aren't the world's best examples. I hope my examples, good and bad, just help you get ideas about how you might kind of zhuzh up your essays. Now, you don't want to go overboard with creative writing. This is actually my next warning, and this is where creative writers can actually fall flat on their face with essays as well, by the way. There is such thing as being too creative in your personal essay, because if all you do is tell a brilliant story with visuals and like scene setting and lots of beautiful prose, you can actually end up saying very little about yourself. They shouldn't be reading paragraphs and paragraphs of story and going, okay, what's the point? Where is this going? What does this tell me about you? In fact, doing paragraphs and paragraphs of just storytelling, like, all these wonderful things that you did in these experiences can actually come across as one-dimensional and a little bit braggy. And you're like, this is maddening. What do I do? What's the right answer? Balance? So yeah, you have to balance that straightforward, fact-based, telling type stuff, like, when I was 9, I loved pottery, with the clay was warm under my fingers. Like, I don't know. It's a balance of both. And that's why I offer the technique of an opening image and then you transition to the more kind of straightforward essay part. That's a classic standard technique because it works. Generally, just be very, very careful with purple prose, like using big fancy words and going over the top on creative writing, because it can actually reflect poorly on you, especially if you use words wrong. I've seen that as well, where it's like, you want to sound smart and really, really creative, but it actually comes across the wrong with admissions. And also just be careful with bragging. It's this really thin line of kind of, you don't want to be humble bragging either, of showing growth and kind of being a little bit humble in how you write about things, but you don't want to be too self-deprecating, but you also don't want to go so light on kind of vulnerability and humility and learning things and go really, really heavy on the, and then I did all the things, because if you go too heavy on, and then I did all the things, it can reflect really poorly on you. I did help a student years and years ago with an essay. They had some incredible accomplishments, but all they wrote about were the incredible accomplishments. And I kind of helped them, because I talked to them, I was like, this is only the tip of the iceberg of something that you did even. It's not even who you are. And I just helped them to like put a lot more personal feeling in it. And then that humility came through, that personal vulnerability came through, and they got into the Ivy League school that they wanted to get into. The first essay wouldn't have gotten them in. It was way too braggy, and they didn't mean to. And so I want to let you guys off the hook. Here's the thing about being a teenager. And same, I'm the cheesy girl who used a lyric, and I'm really ashamed of myself. You will instinctively do things at 16, 17, 18 years old in your writing, especially writing about yourself, that come across really poorly to adults. It's at best, it's just kind of juvenile and embarrassing. That's why I told you not to write about your significant others or breakups or things like that. But also sometimes at worst, it can come across as megalomaniacally like egotistical and sociopathic. Not because you are, but because your brains haven't stopped forming. We're bundles of emotions. We have big feelings, and also essays are hard and no one helps us. And so this is why I give you this advice. Give your essay not just to other teenagers, and in fact, be careful with giving it to other teens because some people steal essays. Find a trusted adult. Parents, sometimes. Parents can actually, because they love you a little too much and care about you too much, sometimes they like meddle with your essay too much and they're trying to like change what you wrote. That's never good. English teachers are also a mixed bag because some of them try to suck all that personal storytelling out of your essay and they want you to write a point paper, which is not what a personal essay is. But some English teachers are great. That doesn't help you, does it? There are strangers on the internet who can help. Go to College Confidential, go to Applying to College, the subreddit. I'll link to both of those down below. There are people who are maybe a few years ahead of you. They're in college. And there's also people like me who do free consults who are really experienced with college essays. Give them your essay. See what they say and use their feedback. Listen to them to basically soften those edges to your essay. That said, you should sound like a teenager in your essay. I don't mean to scare you. Just do like minor editing when someone points something out to you, because there's nothing worse, honestly, than a college admissions essay where it's really, really obvious that a grown-ass adult meddled too much. I can spot those a mile away. I think admissions can spot those a mile away, and they actually work against the student, especially when a parent meddles too hard in an essay and basically clearly writes it for them. That's a strike against the student, and it sucks because it hurts the student and the parent doesn't realize what they did. It's not always the parent. I've seen essay consultants do this too. And I know it's like some people are like, great, I don't have to write my essay. Someone's going to do the heavy lifting for me. But I think it works against the student. The best essay consultants don't meddle too much with the natural voice. I personally, my personal philosophy, it is better that your essay sounds a little less polished, but more genuinely you and organically a teen voice with a little polish. I'm there to help with polish, but I personally do not like to over polish. I do not like to overly insert my own writing or voice or, importantly, emotional perspective. That's what can be really obvious. When an adult inserts like just really savvy emotional perspective on personal and world issues, It's like, what? Now, if a student is really emotionally mature and arrives at that by themselves, good. Make sure the whole essay sounds like it's actually that student. So that's kind of my warning with having adults meddle too much, and yet they can provide really important perspective to kind of help you. They can guide you on like, ooh, maybe this topic isn't working out. They can guide you like, ooh, this line makes you sound bitter, or what have you. So last but certainly not least, to close out this way too long video, the very last bit, and I'll kind of sign off there, I'm just going to read one or two of those sample essays and just show you kind of what I'm talking about. These are successful good essays written by actual teens that got them into school. That said, hit me up with questions down below in the comments. This is one where you're naturally going to have a lot of questions. There's no way on earth I could possibly cover everything, even in this super long video. So yeah, throw questions down below. I don't have the bandwidth right now to take on any personal private clients, except in rare cases. So I'm really just going to point you to some of those resources that I recommended because you can find people to help you. So on to the examples. Hello and welcome to the on-screen portion here. I'm starting with the New York Times. Every year they post successful college admissions essays that students wrote that had something to do with money, sometimes literally, but really what these represent are slice of life essays, really great examples of them, of how you can write about your life situation, hardship, and so on. But I find that these are also just always great in terms of storytelling technique, and they're always just really great essays. So I'm going to read this one by Victoria from Pottsville, PA. She landed at Harvard, and I did give this a skim. This is one of the gut punch ones. I don't mean to set the bar so high, but it's quite beautifully written. So I'm going to read this for you and give you some commentary as I go through it. My kitchen is largely occupied by my old, dirty, warm brown dinner table. This is a great example of just a punchy, visual opening line, boom, all by itself. Also, remember, old, dirty, warm brown dinner table. That's going to come back. It's seen better days. Every time I sit down, I'm surrounded by splatters of old paint, hot glue, and the occasional dab of nail polish. That's thanks to my older sisters. Whenever I sit at either of our two chairs, I have to be extra careful they don't fall apart because the legs are held together by a tedious mixture of wood glue, brute force, and pure spite. Little touch of humor there. The kitchen table itself has been the hub of my family for the entire first half of my life. When I was younger, we, my gram, pap, and two older sisters, would eat a home-cooked meal courtesy of my gram at that old, dirty, warm brown dinner table at exactly 7 p.m. every single night. At these family dinners, I would argue with my pap for fun, watch him get yelled at by my gran for interrupting me eating my dinner, and listen to my sisters either fight or joke. It was always a gamble. Originally, my kitchen table had 5 sturdy wooden seats. A couple years later, when my oldest sister was 16 years old and I was 8, the chair count lowered to 4 as my oldest sister moved out. She fought too much with my gram and wouldn't follow the rules, so she left. Note that you're getting a lot about family structure here, and that it's an unconventional family structure. She lives with her sisters and her grandparents. You also get the first dwindling chair count mechanism here, which becomes a structural device for the essay. And also generally, the lens of this essay is she's writing about what would be a perfectly ordinary household object, her kitchen table, but she's using it as a lens to tell a broader story about her family and her life. Not all essays have to be this kind of creative, but it's one example of a structured story approach to telling a story and saying something about yourself. 3 years later, my grandmother was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer. That triggered a few more changes to our dinner table routine. First, my other older sister started to skip dinners. Not because of the inevitable food quality decline, cancer messes with your taste buds and overall cooking abilities, but because she was never home. I don't think that she wanted to be around post-cancer diagnosis gram. The chair count dropped to 3. The dinners themselves after a year or so were much less frequent, not so much because of my gram, but because my pap was determined to make gram rest. She ignored my pap's concerns, so it sort of ended up in a middle gray area that I had to live in. A year and a half after my grandmother got cancer, she died. It may sound quick in words, but it was pretty dragged out. Don't get me wrong, I love my grandmother, but people with cancer are usually dead long before they die. I have to tell you, this hit me right in the gut. I've gone through this. I completely understand this. And I think it's strong enough and effective enough that even if you haven't, this is effective. But any admissions officer that's gone through cancer, witnessed cancer, this is going to get them. And it's such a demonstration of a very emotionally mature young person who has seen some shit, honestly. Not everyone can write an essay like this, but I think this is a great example of how you can write an essay about this. I was there when she died, right smack dab in the middle of our living room. I was on one side of the bed and my pap was on the other. Her labored breath slowed and then stopped. It sounds depressing, but it was sort of a happy moment. The first thing my pap said was, "Give her a hug, you can't hurt her now." And despite the phlegmy cancer smell, I did. We only needed 2 chairs. That's doing a lot. First of all, amazing application of a single and effective line of dialogue. And then we only needed 2 chairs. After that, Pap and I, with the remnants of our non-traditional American family, built an extra non-traditional family. It took a while before we stabilized ourselves because, to be honest, we were low income before Grandma got cancer, but post-cancer was much worse. Pap and I cut down on everything. We got rid of our cable, phone, and internet. We used less oil, we used less water, we wasted less food, and at times we didn't have a car because our minivan took up a bunch of gas and liked to break down frequently. But despite a dreadfully boring Wi-Fi-less and phone-less year, we made it through. I still live in the same house, except now it has Wi-Fi. Our kitchen table is still standing, though we took the centerpiece of wood out, so now it's the perfect size for just the 2 of us. We don't have nightly dinners anymore, but sometimes Pap and I sit on the couch and hang out. Sure, maybe our coffee table chats aren't the same as our nightly family dinners, and maybe our television doesn't turn on anymore. Maybe our kitchen has ants, and maybe we have to listen to the Super Bowl on our outdated radio from the 90s. And maybe, possibly, he is getting sicker now too. I don't care that my new life revolves around a holy old couch, a grumpy old man, a couple of fat cats, and a bearded dragon. I'm content with my Pap. And I'm content with the fact that every night at 7 p.m., 2 empty chairs surround my old, dirty, warm brown dinner table in the darkness of my kitchen. These days, the lights are on in the living room. So, kind of unfair, this essay is beautiful. I completely see why this girl got into Harvard. This is gorgeous. It hit me right in the feels. Yeah. But hey, I'm the thing with essays that are posted that worked, they're always the cream of the crop. And in that sense, that's why I mentioned that you might not want to read them. They can be really, really intimidating. But if you want to see a superior use of storytelling structure to, in a very short amount of words, tell a story that moved someone and made someone feel like they knew someone. I feel like I know this girl. I care about her and I hope she's doing very well at Harvard. This is a great essay. I'm going to move away from the money-related essays to some more general essays, and this is a fantastic resource I highly recommend. Every single year, Johns Hopkins University posts a small handful of essays that worked. Here are the ones from the class of 2024, so this is the most recent cycle, but a quick Google, you can totally find older ones. So this is the class of 2018. This has been a great resource for years. What I actually like about the Johns Hopkins essays is they really run the gamut. They're all good, obviously, because they all got into Johns Hopkins, but they're always really good at posting a selection of some that are just like truly outstanding, but also some that are just specific and quirky and really feel like a teen wrote them and clearly interested the applications board enough to admit that student alongside the rest of their application. So looking at this, titles, the one that jumps out at me is Fried Rice in 1 Not So Easy Step. So I'm just going to go to that. And this is interesting. Admissions actually is called out. What we learn about Jess from her essay is a willingness to experiment, to take risks and find failure, and to learn from the past, whether it is from her parents and grandparents or just from her own experiences. Her essay is clever and well written, but more importantly, it shows us her willingness to try different things, to embrace the different interests and aspects of her own personality, and to approach different things with a positive attitude. What's interesting is this is a non-traditional essay, and I have to say, I might not go through this whole one because I think it's overwhelming to look at non-traditional essays. It's really rare to nail it on a creative approach, but as you can see, Jess starts with a recipe for fried rice. And then from that recipe, she goes, I bet you didn't read those numbers. I'll let you in on a secret. I didn't either. The ingredients above were copied and pasted from the first Google search result for fried rice recipe. But without any disrespect to the recipe's owner, I can tell you it's wrong. The only true fried rice recipe is no recipe at all. This is a very good essay. So I am going to cut myself off only because this is an overwhelmingly good example of a creative approach to an essay. And I think that's overwhelming. You are welcome to come back and read this. The links are going to be down below, but I am very, very impressed. So let's try this one. It's called And On That Note. So this one is by Curtis, and admission says, Curtis compares himself to polyphonic sounds to convey how he is many things at once, musician, English scholar, filmmaker, and baker, among others. We not only get a good picture of his personality through his writing, but also what kind of student Curtis is, one who thinks across disciplines and has creative ambitions, and someone who wants to contribute to a community. These are qualities we value as an institution. This essay helps us imagine the kind of student he might be here at Hopkins. The sound was loud and discordant, like a hurricane, high notes and low notes mixing together in an audible mess. It was as if 1,000 booming foghorns were in a shouting match with sirens. Unlike me, this was a little abrasive and loud. I liked it. It was completely unexpected and extremely fun to play. Some instruments are built to make multiple notes, like a piano. A saxophone, on the other hand, doesn't play chords, but single notes through one vibrating reed. So we know this is a music essay, and the writer plays the saxophone. And he's explaining a little bit about what that entails, because you want to explain just enough that someone who maybe doesn't know has context, but not go overboard. However, I discovered that you can play multiple notes simultaneously on the saxophone. While practicing a concert D-flat scale, I messed up a fingering for a low B-flat, and my instrument produced a strange sound with 2 notes. My band teacher got very excited and exclaimed, "Hey, you just played a polyphonic note." I like it when accidents lead to discovering new ideas. Good example there of single insertion of dialogue just to kind of build on a story moment, and a nice little kind of cap, a straightforward statement that tells admission something about the student's perspective. I like this polyphonic sound because it reminds me of myself. Many things at once. You assume one thing and get another. At school, I am a course scholar in English, but I am also able to amuse others when I come up with wince-invoking puns. My math and science teachers expect me to go into engineering, but I'm more excited about making films. Discussing current events with my friends is fun, but I also like to share with them my secrets to cooking a good Scotch egg. Even though my last name gives them a hint, the Asian students at our school don't believe that I'm half Japanese. Meanwhile, the non-Asians are surprised that I'm also part Welsh. This is a good example of kind of escalating examples of contrast that tell you a lot about the student. They'll see from this student's resume that they're really strong in STEM, but they really want to be a filmmaker. There's these contrasts, a little bit about his cultural background, and some hints at experiences at his school. I feel comfortable being unique or thinking differently. As a student ambassador, this enables me to help freshmen and others who are new to our school feel welcome and accepted. I help the new students know that it's okay to be themselves. I really like this small call out to an activity that would be on his resume, not going into full detail, but a little snippet of this thing that he does and why he does it. There is added value in mixing things together. I realized this when my brother and I won an International Kavli Science Foundation contest where we explained the math behind the Pixar movie Up. Using stop-motion animation, we explored the plausibility and science behind lifting a house with helium balloons. I like offering a new view and expanding the way people see things. In many of my videos, I combine art with education. I want to continue making films that not only entertain, but also make you think. I love this as an example. You don't have to write an entire essay about a quirky thing that you're into, but you can slip it into an essay and give them a little taste. Like, it's so specifically nerdy to do a mathematical analysis of a Pixar movie. I love it. A lot of people have a single passion that defines them or have a natural talent for something specific. Like my saxophone, I am an instrument, but I can play many notes at once. I'm a scholar and a musician, quiet but talkative, an athlete and a filmmaker, careful but spontaneous, a fan of Johnny Cash and Kill the Noise, hardworking but playful, a martial artist and a baker, one of a kind but an identical twin. Will polyphonic notes resonate in college? Yes. For instance, balancing a creative narrative with scientific facts will make a more believable story. I want to bring together different kinds of students, such as music, film, and English majors, to create more meaningful art. Understanding fellow students' perspective, talents, and ideas are what build a great community. I'm looking forward to discovering my place in the world by combining various interests. Who I am doesn't always harmonize and may seem like nothing but noise to some, but what I play, no matter how discordant, can be beautiful. It's my own unique polyphonic note. This is a great example of a non-literal closing image. This echoes the ideas and themes of the opening image, opening idea, without directly repeating it. And that's what your essay should do. It's an arc of a story. It's coming back to a theme. Even when you put things in the middle that aren't literally the thing, you can move around in your essay and talk about a lot of different things, but it's about having a lens for telling the story or a framing device or something that threads through the whole thing. In this case, the concept of a polyphonic note. I'm going to cut myself off here because this video is far too long, but that's just 2 examples of successful essays. As I mentioned, I'm going to have notes down below, and ask me any of your questions in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week, normally about book writing, mind you. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and good luck with your admissions essays.